Lonely highways snake through the Arizona desert, where darkness stretches for miles and the air grows thick with ancient secrets. Every mile on these haunted roads draws you deeper into mystery, making you question what truly trails just beyond your headlights. Sometimes it's just you and the road, until you realize you're not alone. Dare to ride with haunted fears tonight. If you're ready to face what lurks after midnight, hit subscribe and welcome yourself into the Haunted Fears horror family. Your nightmares start here. They say you only see her if you're driving Highway 87 alone at night. The moon, a thin ribbon. The desert breathing secrets out of the darkness. If you ever feel a sudden chill brush your neck, if the silence thickens and a strange presence weighs on your consciousness, slow down and keep your eyes forward. My name is Rohan, and there are stretches of Arizona road I will never travel the same way again. Highway 87 first became part of my life as a necessity, a means of chasing late-night delivery deadlines and clearing my thoughts somewhere between Payson's piney mountains and the far-off orange haze of Phoenix. Those long hauls punctuated my weeks. Sometimes the soundtrack was vintage rock fizzing through static. Sometimes it was pure silence, apart from the hum of my tires and the straining of my own tired breaths. On most nights, the vastness was comforting. That road scrawled black across the land, looping around scrub and past distant ridges, a world away from city noise. The only interruptions were the white wooden crosses nailed into the dusty shoulder as the miles ticked by. Markers you learn to ignore, but never truly forget. People say each one carries a story, and the wrong feeling catches you at night if you stare too long. It was early spring, the sort of chill that creeps over your bones even after you've turned up the heat. The night started like any other, nothing out of place except my own fatigue and a soft mist gathering on the horizon. I'd stopped at a rundown gas station to grab bad coffee. No faces, just the drone of the vending machine and the flicker of fluorescent tubes. Back on the highway, the world closed around the edges, darkness thick against the windows. Something changed after midnight. The road dipped and wound through a canyon, pines growing denser, rocks looming on either side. My headlights cut shallow tunnels in the gloom, the only proof I was making progress. My thoughts drifted, snapping back every so often when the truck bumped over expansion joints. I was alone, until I wasn't. She appeared at first as a pale blur ahead, so faint I thought my eyes were playing tricks, darting between the stripes of centerline and the crush of shadowy brush. I eased my foot onto the brake, instinctively shifting towards the center lane. As I closed in, her outline sharpened. A woman, white-dressed, impossibly still, standing in the middle of the road. There was a coldness then, a sudden drop, as if the air itself recoiled. Time felt syrupy, seconds stretching as panic leapt in my chest. The tires shrieked in protest as I swerved, narrowly missing her. Yet, as my headlights swung past, I saw her face just long enough to feel something climb, icy and urgent, into the back of my mind. Her eyes, vacant and endless, met mine, and a wordless fear swept over every part of me. For a breath, I thought I'd hit her. I checked my mirrors, heart hammering. The road behind was empty. Empty, except there, standing, perfectly motionless in my red taillight's glow, was the same figure. She hadn't moved. I kept going, pulse pounding, the radio distorting itself into noise as static ate the music. I tried to convince myself it was a mirage, exhaustion warping my senses, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in the cab. Every now and then, a cold patch of air would crawl from my left shoulder to the back of my neck. A weight, gentle at first, then pressing, like someone leaning in for a secret. A mile later, the headlights flickered. I tapped the console, knuckles white, forcing myself to focus on the road. Then came the sound, whispery, almost a sigh, floating through the static from the passenger seat. A draft brushed across my spine. I dared a glance into the rearview mirror. She was there, no longer standing on the road but sitting impossibly still in the space directly behind my seat. Her face, colorless, her hair a waterfall of night, and those eyes, unblinking, studying me as though I were a puzzle she'd solved decades ago. I gasped and snapped my head forward, refusing to check again, my hands trembling on the wheel. Fear invaded every rational thought. I fixed my gaze to the reflected stretch of white lines ahead, whispering desperate apologies to the darkness. Minutes dragged on in that purgatory. I told myself if I just reached the next bend, the next strip of yellow-lit gas station, it would break the spell. But the road felt endless. Time shattered into shards that cut against my sanity. Eventually, the lights of a half-abandoned rest area cut through the gloom. I fought the urge to slam on the brakes, easing to a crawl instead, parking under the weakest, sputtering lamp. Without looking back, I clambered out of the cab, letting the shiver of belief, or delirium, crash over me. In the silence, the only movement was the bobbing head of a moth circling the streetlight, and my own fist clenched tight around my keys. The legend of Highway 87 tells of a woman killed on those winding turns, still searching for the life that left her behind. Maybe I became another notch in her endless vigil, a witness, cursed, or maybe just changed. Since that night, the road feels different to me. Sometimes, driving past the same spot, I feel the air drop or catch a pale shape at the edge of my vision. And every time I look into my rear view when the world turns quiet, I wonder, who's really riding with me? I only know this. The loneliest highways can stare back at you, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll make it home with nothing more than a haunted memory. My name is Rohan. If you find yourself drifting through the dark on Highway 87, keep your eyes front and never stop for shadows. There are some travelers who never reach their destination, and some rides you wish you'd never offered. On Route 66, the old mining town of Oatman hides a secret that has made countless drivers question what's real and what slips through from the other side. My name is Lance, and I've lived in Arizona all my life, driving the lonely stretches between forgotten towns where the desert swallows sound and the nights stretch on forever. Route 66 through Oatman was one of those roads I'd traveled 100 times. Cracked asphalt, rusty signs advertising ghost towns, the scent of creosote thick in the dry air. I'd heard the stories growing up, the whispers at truck stops about phantom passengers and cold spots in cars, but I'd always written them off as bored drivers with overactive imaginations. That changed one October night when the temperature dropped faster than it should have, and fog crept in from nowhere, clinging to the road like something alive. I'd been driving back from a friend's place in Kingman, taking the scenic route because the interstate felt too sterile, too disconnected from the land. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and the radio had given up miles ago, crackling into static before going silent altogether. The road was mine, empty in both directions, just the hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of my high beams catching a coyote's eyes in the brush. Then I saw her. She stood just off the shoulder, near a weathered mile marker illuminated by my headlights. A young woman in a faded denim jacket, her thumb out in the universal sign for help. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and even from a distance, something about her posture seemed wrong, too still, like a photograph frozen mid-motion. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but the desert at night is unforgiving, and the thought of leaving someone stranded didn't sit right. I slowed to a stop, rolling down the passenger window. She moved toward the car with an odd gliding step, and when she leaned down to peer inside, I felt the temperature plummet. Her eyes were dark, too dark, pools that seemed to go on forever. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice came out tight. She nodded once, slowly, and opened the door. The interior light flickered as she slid into the seat, and I caught a faint scent. Not perfume, but something earthy and cold, like wet stone. She didn't speak, just stared straight ahead through the windshield, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Where are you headed?" I tried again, pulling back onto the road. Nothing. Not even a glance. I told myself she was in shock, maybe stranded after a fight or a breakdown. People react to stress in different ways. But the silence pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, and the fog seemed to close in tighter around the car. My headlights barely cut through it now, the world reduced to a tunnel of swirling gray. Miles passed. I checked the rearview mirror. Her reflection sat perfectly still, unblinking. My mouth went dry. I tried to focus on the road, on the white line disappearing under my tires. But every few seconds my eyes flicked back to her. She hadn't moved, hadn't breathed. The realization crept over me slowly, a cold dread spreading through my chest. I couldn't hear her breathing. "You okay?" My voice cracked, and I hated how afraid I sounded. Her head turned toward me, the motion smooth and unnatural, and when she spoke, her voice was a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Almost home." The words sent ice through my veins. I glanced at the road, then back at her, and froze. Her face had changed. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes reflected the dashboard lights like an animal's. I wanted to scream, to slam on the brakes and throw her out, but my hands locked on the wheel, my body refusing to obey. Then, as suddenly as the fear had gripped me, she was gone. I blinked, and the passenger seat was empty. No door opening, no rush of wind, just the faint impression where she'd been sitting, and a coldness that clung to the air like frost. My heart hammered in my chest as I pulled over, tires crunching on gravel, and threw the car into park. I sat there, shaking, staring at the empty seat. The scent lingered, damp earth, old fabric, something wrong. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally made it home, I spent hours online, searching for any explanation, any story that matched what I'd experienced. That's when I found it, buried in local forums and ghost hunting blogs. The legend of the Oatman hitchhiker, a young woman who died on that stretch of highway decades ago, still trying to get home, still flagging down drivers who don't know any better. Some said she vanished at the same spot every time. Others claimed she left behind a chill that never quite went away. I went back the next day, in broad daylight, and found the mile marker where I'd picked her up. There was a small wooden cross half buried in the weeds, paint peeling, no name. Just a date from 1983 carved into the wood. I stood there for a long time, the desert wind tugging at my clothes, and felt that same coldness wrap around me. Now, whenever I drive Route 66 at night, I keep my windows up and my doors locked. I don't stop for anyone, no matter how desperate they look, because I know the truth now. Some passengers never leave, and some roads are haunted by more than memories. If you ever see a lone figure by the side of the road near Oatman, thumb out, eyes too dark, keep driving. Don't look back, and whatever you do, don't let her in. My name is Lance, and I learned the hard way that not everyone on the highway is looking for a ride. Some are just looking for company in the endless dark. Not everyone who travels Arizona's Blood Alley makes it home, and there are some things on that long, twisted stretch that can't be explained by tire marks or broken glass. If you believe the worst thing that can happen is a crash, you haven't heard what happens when the shadows themselves start following you. My name is Avi, and for over a decade I worked as a long-haul truck driver, guiding 18 wheels and a loaded trailer along some of the deadliest roads in the Southwest. Out of them all, nothing ever unsettled me the way Highway 93 did. The locals call it Blood Alley, and not just because of its grisly accident tally. This isn't just a road with sharp turns and narrow shoulders. It's a place where the past and present bleed together, every mile haunted by those who never left. I made my first run up Blood Alley in the late summer, the sky bruised with the last hints of sunset as I crossed onto the winding stretch outside Wickenburg. I'd heard whispers at every truck stop from here to Kingman, stories about the phantom bus, about headlights that approach out of nowhere, about white crosses that seem to multiply overnight. Most of all, I heard not to stop for anything, or anyone, you might see on the shoulder after dark. Back then, I thought stories were a way to explain all the anxiety those dangerous miles inspired. One close call with a steep shoulder, or a truck blowing its horn around a blind curve, is enough to make any driver superstitious. But my skepticism started to wane that September, after the night I watched a shape dart across my lane and nearly sent me into the median. The surge of adrenaline, the knot in my gut. It was just the beginning. What made Blood Alley different wasn't just the constant threat of accident. It was the way fear became a living presence. I'd drive mile after mile, hypnotized by the endless double yellow, only to jerk awake when an inexplicable chill flashed through the cab or my radio fizzed without warning. Sometimes the air itself would thicken, growing heavier, my headlights revealing nothing but a wall of mist where the desert ought to be bone dry. Drivers talk about that kind of haze, the fog that swallows sound and vision, sometimes rolling in on a clear night. It was on one of those nights, half the highway hidden from view, when I learned what true dread feels like. The sky was black, moonless, stars choked off by cloud. I was climbing a grade near Union Pass when the truck's engine began to sputter, threatening to stall just as I hit the most deserted stretch for miles. Cursing, I eased off the gas and tried to coax it along. That's when I saw the bus. At first, I thought it was some sort of breakdown. The rear lights burned dim, too close together for any normal vehicle. As I pulled closer, the silhouette resolved into an old bus, rounded edges, the words nearly worn off its side. I'd heard this story 100 times. The ghost bus of Highway 93, Bus 777, vanished with all 48 passengers decades ago on a run to Nevada. No one had ever found it. Only drivers claimed glimpsed it along the loneliest stretches of Blood Alley. I told myself it had to be a prank, a retrofitted bus, maybe one of those weirdo local tourist traps. But as I crept forward, the temperature inside the cab dropped so sharply my breath fogged the glass. My lights struck the bus's chrome bumper, and I saw what looked like streaks of silver tears running down from its headlights. I flashed my brights, half hoping to see a driver's shape in the window. Nothing. Just empty seats. Illuminated in a dim, unnatural glow, shadows slumped over as if the bus had been abandoned mid-ride. The bus began moving without warning, rolling ahead, then picking up speed. Its taillights winked an invitation, and before I knew it, I was matching its pace, both of us gliding silently through the fog. I kept expecting the mist to thin, the bus to slow as we neared the summit. Instead, it sped up, each turn more dangerous, my knuckles white on the wheel as I struggled to keep sight of its flickering lights. Suddenly, it darted left, crossing over to the opposing lane before bleeding into the fog and vanishing. My radio, which had been silent for hours, erupted in static so loud it made me flinch. Then, as quickly as it began, the noise died. That's when the crash happened. It wasn't my rig, this time. The sound, metal on metal, screeching and shattering, echoed through the night. I pumped my brakes, pulling over just as another truck barreled past, horn blaring in warning. For a few moments, it felt like all reality had warped. The wreckage, the bus, myself standing on the shoulders shivering, surrounded by the low wail of wind and faint stink of burnt rubber. But when I stumbled back to the road to look, there was nothing. No bus, no cars, no sign that anyone else had been there. Only the marks left by my own tires, trembling hands, and a strange, liquid puddle in the road that glinted silver in my headlights for a heartbeat. When I blinked again, it was gone. My mind spun as I climbed back into the cab, every nerve frayed, paranoia clawing at my reason. Through the rest of the night, whenever I checked the mirrors, I swore I saw shapes. Faces sometimes, or hands pressed against unseen windows. At times I felt the presence of passengers behind me, silent and expectant, as if the bus had not left me entirely alone. That wasn't the last time Blood Alley played with my senses. Over the coming years, there were more unnerving experiences. Drivers who radioed about seeing me trailing the ghost bus. Friends who claim to spot phantom headlights pacing them through the switchbacks, only to watch them fade like smoke and inexplicably turn up behind, closer, hungrier. Even daylight drives couldn't erase those impressions, especially not the solemn rows of crosses that multiplied each season, white against the red dust. There's one stretch, just past a pile of sun-bleached wreckage and stone memorials clustered against a fence, that always makes my stomach knot. Some nights, an unmarked sedan will appear in the rear view, tailgating for miles before vanishing at the next curve. Sometimes the voice of a CB radio rattles out your name, mispronounced, a pattern that spooked more than one veteran. People always ask, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I never wanted to, but after years on Highway 93, I learned to greet that fear with a measure of respect. You can prepare for bad roads, careless drivers, even wild animals darting out from the shoulder. Blood Alley is different. It breaks you down, makes you question your sanity, your survival, the thin boundary separating the living from the dead. So, what do I do now? I keep my cab lights on, drive slower than I need, and always keep moving. I don't stop for anyone waving in the fog. Don't try to follow a bus that shouldn't be there, and never pull over alone at night. The dead on Blood Alley don't rest easy, and sometimes, when the wind shifts, you can hear their stories blowing through the cracked windows and the hum of tires on blacktop. Their warnings aren't just for superstition's sake. They're there to keep the living alive. And when the shadows lengthen, when the road grows narrow and the fog creeps in, I remind myself that nothing on this stretch is ever what it seems. The only way out is to keep driving, not looking too long in the mirror, and never losing faith in the bright slit of your own headlights. My name is Avi, and in the long, lonely nights on Blood Alley, I learned that the most terrifying ghosts are those you can't leave behind, especially when you're the one who survived. Most people laugh when they hear stories about beasts and demons haunting the Arizona highways, dismissing them as desert myths to scare new drivers. I stopped laughing forever the night I saw what chased me down Route 6666. And I promise you, some things out here aren't human and never have been. My name is Keaton, and I've lived my whole life in a world that runs parallel to the night. A job that finds you driving through places normal folks deliberately avoid after sundown. Ghost stories never bothered me. I've slept in abandoned rest stops, crossed through dust storms in the pitch black, and learned to ignore that feeling when the hair prickled on the back of my arms. I considered myself grounded, logical, the sort who double-checks tire pressure and roadside warnings, not the kind who spooks at every bump or shadow. All that changed the summer I agreed to haul a load out of Gallup, heading south through the loneliest patch of the old Route 666. Most folks prefer to call it Route 491 nowadays, but the locals still whisper its old name, Devil's Highway. Everybody seems to have a reason for wanting that stretch forgotten. The sky seems lower, the cacti hunch closer, and the silence grows so thick you can hear your own heartbeat. It was still daylight when I started, a pale sun blazing down and the road shimmering ahead. My plan was simple: cover as much ground before dusk as possible, make it into Holbrook by midnight, then spend the rest of the journey on safer, more predictable roads. If you grew up hearing about the accidents, flip trucks, and unlucky travelers who'd vanished on Route 666, you'd be superstitious too. But I never believed in cursed numbers until that trip. I ate dinner in my truck at a lonely gas station near the border, the kind of place where the ice cream freezer is broken and the only company is a jittery desert lizard on the curb. By dusk, clouds layered the sky, deepening everything to a copper and plum-colored haze. There was a weight in the air, the kind you feel just before a thunderstorm hits. But the forecast had promised nothing except relentless heat. Everything changed after the sun vanished. By the time the last construction signs disappeared and cell signal blinked out, the world had shrunk to the cone of my headlights and the low whine of my engine. I was only 30 minutes out when my first shiver of dread ran down my back. Not just fear, but a full-body certainty that something was wrong. A figure darted at the edge of my vision, huge, black, with limbs too long for a coyote, and moving much too fast. My pulse jumped. I chalked it up to highway exhaustion, or maybe just a trick of the shifting shadows. But then the hairs stood on my neck and arms as a new sound cut through the cab, a low growl, metallic and old, the kind of sound you don't so much hear but feel in your ribs. The growling rose in volume, then stopped. Silence pressed back twice as hard. When I glanced in the side mirror, my stomach knotted. Matching my speed in the emergency lane was something massive, loping on all fours, but rising nearly as tall as my window. Its eyes burned a feral, unnatural red, the glare and shape of living embers, and its fur was the color of scorched earth. Its movements were all wrong, jerky, fast, impossibly fluid, more shadow than animal. Every instinct screamed at me to speed up, and the rig groaned as I hit 85, my eyes fixed front and breathing ragged. That's when I saw it up ahead. A curve in the road barely visible in the headlights, and right at the apex, a patch of swirling dust. The thing beside me kept pace, lungs heaving like bellows. My hands started to sweat. I've handled blown tires, sliding trailers, and panic stops, but nothing compares to seeing a demon dog on your shoulder, daring you to run. I hit the curve hard, wheels screeching. The beast was waiting for me on the other side now, a black blur cutting in front of the truck, forcing me to swerve into the other lane. I braced for impact, but there was only emptiness, no thud, no drag, just the cold rush of wind through an open gap somewhere in the cab. My radio snapped on, white noise, then a roar of old country, the kind my dad used to play when he wanted to ward off bad luck. Then clear as day, a raspy voice broke through the static. Don't stop. Don't look back. For the next 10 miles, every shadow shimmered with threat. Shapes flickered in my peripheral vision, vanishing before I could focus on them. The demon dog stayed just at the edge of the beams, sometimes running parallel, sometimes falling behind, but never fully gone. Its eyes hovered at window height, unblinking, always just outside the safe circle of light. The cab grew icy, my breath fogging the windshield. I tried everything to shake the feeling, rolling down the window, blasting the heater, blasting the AC, mumbling prayers and curses in equal measure. My knuckles hurt from gripping the steering wheel. At one point, my headlights caught something reflecting back. Not road, but a snarl of teeth, far too many and far too large for any desert animal. The landscape changed as I drove. The cacti seemed to lean inward, stones built up on the side of the asphalt like rows of watching eyes. Sometimes the dog would fall behind, and silence would descend, so thick I was sure I'd left it behind, until a flash of fur and another set of glowing eyes appeared in the next mirror, causing my heart to thud so loud I could barely hear anything else. It didn't end at any particular mile marker. Instead, the sense of pursuit faded so slowly, I didn't realize it was gone at first. The silence seemed less threatening. The air warmed, and my phone signal finally blinked back to life. The next gas station, I stumbled out of the truck, legs weak, lungs raw, clothes soaked in sweat. The clerk gave me a weird look when I asked if anyone else had seen a huge black dog on the road, then handed me a bottle of water without a word. Only later did I learn, searching online and asking around, that I wasn't alone. Countless drivers reported the Hellhound of Route 6666, a creature as much legend as warning, a sign that you've crossed into the shadow world where the highway's name was written. They said some saw it only once, others saw it every time they crossed at night. A few unlucky souls crashed, their last words describing a beast with burning eyes blocking the road. The most chilling stories came from those who swore the dog followed them home, haunting their dreams weeks after the trip had ended. I still drive Arizona's highways, just not that stretch alone, and never with the windows down after sunset. I cannot say for sure what stalked me that night. only that it wanted me to know the difference between fear and terror, and that some roads keep their curses, no matter how many times you change the sign. If you ever find yourself driving the Devil's Highway with only the stars for company, remember my story. Don't speed up when you see something impossible running beside you, but don't slow down either. Above all, never meet its eyes in the rear view. Some things out here just want to be remembered. My name is Keaton, and I've learned that when something old and hungry runs beside you in the desert night, all you can do is keep moving and pray that you're not the next legend whispered about in the dark. For those who laugh at desert myths have never been truly, desperately chased. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones when you think you've finally found safety. A lone figure stands at the junction under the faulty streetlight, and your instincts scream at you to keep moving, but the silent, pleading face makes you pause. Who decides your fate at the edge of the unknown, your own fear, or what's waiting in the night? My name is Orlando, and I never believed in guardian spirits or vengeful ghosts. Not until I learned what lingers at the forgotten crossroads outside Yarnell, where Highway 89 branches into a cracked, overgrown spur. I'm a traveler by necessity, not by choice. For years, work and bad luck kept me bouncing between dusty little towns, chasing opportunities that always seemed a week too late. Most of my life has played out on the desolate shoulders of Arizona's highways, where rest stops and roadside diners blur together, and the horizon always hints at a better place just out of reach. That September was particularly hard. My last job fell through, and my pickup was running on fumes as I wound my way north toward Prescott. The air was brittle like the start of monsoon season, when thunderheads pile up and nothing feels quite real. By the time I hit the junction with that old spur, one of those crossroads that seems stitched together from 100 ghost stories, I was already nervous, rationing sips of lukewarm water and promising myself I'd stop at the next station no matter the cost. But the next station never came. Instead, as my fuel gauge needle hovered on empty and my anxiety rose with the chorus of cicadas and distant lightning, I saw her. A figure at the crossroads, illuminated by a flickering yellow bulb, one arm raised, not in a hitchhiker's wave, but palm held out flat, almost commanding the world to stop. In the moments that followed, logic and superstition warred inside me. I'd never been someone who picked up strangers, much less in the Badlands after midnight. But something in her stance, a desperate urgency, a kind of exhausted authority, rooted me to the spot. My truck rattled over the pavement, brakes whining as I came to a stop 20 yards ahead of her. From behind, the emptiness of the night pressed in. She never moved as I rolled down the window. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind lifted her pale dress, and even though her face was turned away, I caught a glimpse of her profile. Young, worn, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the darkness. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low and deliberate it felt like an echo from somewhere deeper inside my mind. "You don't want to take that road tonight," she said, her words almost lost in the sudden hush. Every hair on my arms rose, not just from her words, but from the chilling certainty with which she delivered them. The old road she indicated, barely visible except for a tangle of faded signs and creeping weeds, seemed to pulse at the edges of my vision. I asked why, my tone shaky, and she replied simply, "Some people don't come back." I shivered, the sweat on my forehead suddenly cold. I almost laughed. What could possibly make a road more dangerous than the rest? I was about to thank her and move on when she reached out. Her hand never touching mine, but the air itself seemed to shift, thick and buzzing like a power line. For a second, I thought I saw something flickering down the abandoned spur. Blue-white lights, impossible to explain, darting just past the reach of the street lamp. "Go north," she said quietly. "I'll stay until you're safe." Nerves jangling, I did as she said. The truck started easily, but my mind felt sluggish, as if pushing against a tide. I watched her in my mirror as long as I could. She didn't move, didn't wave, just stood sentinel, pale and still beneath the flickering bulb. I drove 40 miles without seeing another soul. When I finally stumbled into a gas station, the clerk gave me a curious look, saying I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I almost laughed in her face. She didn't know how close to the truth she'd gotten. As I filled up, I hesitantly asked about the old spur, just to see what she'd say. She only shrugged, but an older man at the counter replied, "Road's cursed. Lost a friend out there. Sometimes folks see a girl standing at the intersection keeping drivers away. Saved more lives than you'd think. Not every spirit wants company." Back on the highway, I kept replaying everything. The crossroads, the warning, the shimmering lights in the brush. Night after night, the memory haunted me. Sometimes, driving late, I'd catch glimpses of pale figures in my mirrors, always at the margins of light. Sometimes, when thunder rolled across the desert, I'd remember her voice and the certainty of protection. The sense that there was something left in the world mapping the difference between wandering forever and coming home. I never took that spur. Years later, I found out 2 kids disappeared there after a storm. Their truck found idling in a ditch, doors open, no sign of them but muddy footprints. Locals added another memorial cross to the fence just beside the old mile marker, used as a spot no one mows or maintains anymore. And sometimes, when the power lines crackle on stormy nights, folks say you can still see her. Pale, silent, holding back the dark, trading her endless vigil for the chance that some other desperate soul will live to see the dawn. If you ever find yourself facing a crossroads where the light flickers, and some impossible voice tells you to turn away, listen. Some warnings aren't meant to frighten you. They're meant to guide you home. My name is Orlando, and I never figured out what would have happened if I'd kept going that night. Sometimes, at lonely junctions, I still feel her watching, keeping the balance for those who don't realize the most important choice is the one you almost didn't make. Not all haunted places want to hurt you. Some only want to keep you moving because the road behind is darker than anything you can imagine. If you ever find yourself surrounded by crosses and flowers lining a lonely Arizona hillside, ask yourself if you're really leaving something behind, or if something is just waiting for midnight to remember your name. Every memorial has its watcher, and some debts demand a witness. My name is Everest, and I never meant to become part of anyone's haunting. I'm not a person who believes that grief lingers, or that the dead spend their nights pacing the land they lost. I believe in the here and now, the thrum of my truck engine, the daily grind, and the ordinary comfort of forward motion. But the night I stopped along Highway 89, in the pass above Yarnell, where the road writhes around cliffs and rows of homemade memorials bloom like ghostly wildflowers, all those solid certainties crumbled. That evening started as routine. I was ferrying a pallet of equipment up from Phoenix, making good time, the air humming with cicadas and faint distant thunder. I'd passed the same memorials dozens of times before. White wooden crosses, statues, wilted plastic bouquets, the ghosts of candle wax tallow streaking the red rock. That night, a simple request from my mother changed everything. She'd asked if I could stop and leave flowers at one of those crosses. A friend's son, gone a decade, just passed the sharpest curve before Yarnell. I agreed, not out of superstition but out of memory and loyalty, the type of basic kindness we perform to reassure the living, not disturb the dead. The sun was sinking as I pulled onto the shoulder, my headlights stretching the shadows into pale stripes. The wind gusted up the draw, rattling the plastic windmills that someone else had left, stirring the faded letters on hand-painted plaques. I gathered the flowers from the back seat and walked carefully along the shoulder, the soft crunch of gravel impossibly loud. The silence pressed on me. Even the insects seemed to hush as I reached the chosen cross. It was nothing elaborate, just a simple wooden staking with a wire wreath hung crooked, the paint flaking off a name I didn't want to say out loud. I knelt, placed the flowers at its base, and remembered the boy I'd once met at a barbecue. The shared laughter and his mother's grief like a ghost in the room years later. I whispered a goodbye and hurried back to my truck, suddenly aware just how little space there was between the living and the dead on that slope. As I drove away, the sun went with me, plunging everything into a blue twilight that bled quickly into darkness. The road twisted ahead, through a narrow ravine, the memorials multiplying in the growing dark. With every curve, my headlights flashed across dozens of faces, photographs glued to plywood, eyes hollow or smiling, staring back from the dust. My chest tightened. All at once, I felt as if the hillside itself was holding its breath, waiting. I don't remember when I realized that the rearview mirror was wrong. At first, I glimpsed only shapes. A blur here, a shadow there, maybe tricking myself with reflected brake lights or distant lightning. But the longer I stared, the more I saw. A faint glimmer in the night. A procession of shapes following my taillights, luminous and white, spaced like mourners in a funeral line. Each held something. A flower, a cross, a candle. Eyes locked with mine in the mirror. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands ached. A mile or so later, the engine sputtered. Radio static erupted, blending into a chorus of indistinct voices. Some praying, some singing, some whispering memories, only meant for the dead. I tried reasoning with myself, blaming fatigue and nerves, but the chill was too real. My breath clouded in the cab, and the scent of fresh lilacs, impossible in the high desert, filled the air around me. Suddenly, at a turn that drops away into a night-black hollow, I had to stop. My headlights flickered, and for a heartbeat the world sharpened, as if all sound had vanished. Along the embankment, lining both sides of the road, stood dozens of pale forms. Watchers with empty arms, faces turned not toward me but toward the crosses above. I could see every detail: the tattered Sunday dresses, boots dusted in red sand, old ball caps, burned-out candles flickering in hands that trembled but never dropped. I sat frozen, heart beating so hard I thought it was going to tear free. Then, just as a whisper brushed my ear, a name I'd only ever heard spoken in grief, never from a stranger, every form turned and stared straight into my soul through the windshield. Terror rooted me in place. My window fogged, and for a second I thought I could see handprints blooming in the condensation, each one smaller or bigger, overlapping stories I'd never know. I don't remember how long the moment lasted. Maybe a second, maybe an hour. When I finally slammed the truck into gear, the engine coughed, caught, and I fled down the mountain as fast as the switchbacks allowed, never daring to look back. At the bottom of the pass, I pulled over, shaking, numb. The night was silent again. Not a single other driver passed. The rear view held only emptiness, but the scent of lilacs, impossibly fresh, lingered on my jacket, and clinging to my shoes was a dust the color of memorial candles. I didn't sleep that night. I could still feel the weight of those silent witnesses, waiting for someone willing to remember them, acknowledge their grief, see the line between memory and haunting. Later, when I told my mother about the flowers, she stared at me with two wide eyes and whispered that no one had visited that memorial in years, not since the original cross had burned in a grass fire. Someone, she said, must have been waiting for that kindness a long time. Now, I travel that pass only in daylight, always offering a silent prayer to the memorials and their endless patient watchers. Some debts are never paid, and some stories never stop replaying in the dark. If you ever leave anything behind at a mountainside shrine, remember this. Sometimes the dead just want to be remembered, but sometimes what they want most is for you to become part of the long, silent vigil. My name is Everest, and among the midnight memorials above Yarnell, I learned that a simple act of kindness can open the door between worlds, and that what stands just beyond the headlights may be waiting for someone, anyone, to finally look back. What if entire hours vanished while everyone around you swore they'd never left your side? What if you came out of the desert fog, hearts pounding, clocks all wrong, and realized you'd been somewhere, or somewhen, that nobody else believed in? My name is Marigold, and nothing about the lost time on Route 66 ever let me rest. I used to drive with a convoy, running supplies out of Kingman up to the far northern reaches of Arizona. There's an unspoken rule with truckers on the old roads. Keep your radio on, never break the chain, and trust the familiar lights of the rig in front, even when the ground fog rolls in and the world shrinks to a few bare feet of pavement. We'd pulled out after sunset, a mix of old friends and new faces tied together by CB handles and a love of the open road. The night felt ordinary, jokes traded freely about the next bad diner or legendary stretch of potholes, someone rattling off fake ghost stories to keep us awake. People always give Route 66 its haunted reputation, but we'd heard it all. Phantom riders, vanishing girls, even tales of a stretch where time itself gets funny. Odd rumors, I told myself, but nothing for a rational mind to worry over. Our run had barely started when the air began to turn. A thin, chalky mist hugged the desert floor, and I watched with a frown as my headlights glowed white against a fog that shouldn't have existed in that much heat. The radio went jittery, static interspersed with sharp, sudden squelch. Normal for old bands, but grating nonetheless. That's when the trouble began. One moment I was tucked neatly in the convoy, lullabied by the steady red lights of the trailer ahead, the chatter of the radio, the glow of cigarette tips sliding past the glass. Then the next, everything, ahead and behind, went blank. Taillights flickered, dipped away, and the whole world went silent. I must have blinked. The mist thickened so suddenly it was like being dunked underwater. Tire noise vanished. The sound of the engine faded. Even the dashboard glowed faint far away, as if I'd been scooped from the highway and dropped into a colder world. But I kept driving, knuckles white, feet steady, following some internal animal logic that said forward was the only way through. There was something in the fog with me, an odd shimmer, a glint of blue every so often, like fleeting reflections in a concave mirror. I felt, rather than saw, the presence of others, a tangle of movement on either side of the road, vanishing if I dared a glance. Have you ever been so tired or disoriented that your memories feel elastic, stretching and snapping back, refusing to hold any clear sequence? That's how those minutes, hours, felt in that fog. I tried the radio, voice sharp and panicked, but all that came back was a jumble of half-familiar voices, as if I'd tuned in to different years at once. Someone, somewhere, shouted my name, the first time in years anyone had used it so sharply, and a warning to hold the line. Then everything blinked out. I don't remember seeing the road. I could have been flying, or rooted to the spot, wrapped in the endless hush. When the fog dissipated, I was parked at a rest stop I didn't remember approaching. The dashboard clock and my phone disagreed by over an hour. My truck's GPS still traced my progress as a perfect, uninterrupted line, but according to the others in the convoy, I'd never left their sight, except for a split-second's gap that nobody could really explain. Yet my hands shook, my mouth tasted of copper, and my water bottle had rolled into the passenger footwell, as if the rig had jolted hard around some impossible curve. We regrouped. There were stories then, half the group thinking we'd stop for a break, others remembering a sudden stutter in the world. One claimed his radio picked up an AM station that hadn't broadcast in 30 years. I asked if anyone had seen the blue flickering lights in the mist. Nobody had. It would have ended there, a weird memory to joke about at truck stops, except for the dreams. For weeks afterwards, I'd wake up with the cold taste of fog on my tongue, vague images swirling behind my eyes, a marching convoy of lights, faces in the windows that flickered between strangers and friends, snatches of music from distant years. Sometimes I'd remember voices, but not their words, drifting through the static, always just out of reach. Other times, my phone alarm would go off at the wrong hour, or the kitchen clock would glitch forward after a night of uneasy sleep. I started keeping odd talismans in the truck, spare bulbs, coins, a lucky rabbit's foot from a flea market, anything to tether me to the present. Old-timers said lost time on the highway was a sure sign you'd passed through some rift. There are places, they whispered, where the past and present overlap, cross-hatching with the future, and loop you in for a lap you never registered. I believed them only at 3 a.m., when fear was soft and my disquiet louder. Not every lost time is a curse. Some folks get what they wished for, the chance to make a different turn, miss one disaster for another they'll never remember. I never learned what the blue lights wanted, or if the voices in the static belonged to travelers still out there, looping forever through the Route 66 night. But the next time your clock skips a heartbeat, or you find yourself at a familiar rest stop you're sure you didn't plan to visit, look back at the road behind you. Do you remember every mile? I still drive, of course. That's how you ward off the fear. Keep the wheels turning, keep the world moving, keep the past behind you, where it belongs. But some nights, when the fog hugs the desert floor and the air gets funny, I count every heartbeat, every mile marker, reminding myself that sometimes the things trying to reach us from the other side aren't ghosts, just echoes searching for their way home. My name is Marigold, and on Route 66, if the world skips and time loops or blue lights flicker at the edge of your vision, don't stop. Just keep moving. Sometimes, the only way out of the fog is to leave the mystery behind before it remembers your name. Ghost towns are easy to spot on a map, but the ones that linger just beyond the edge of headlights, those are the ones you never forget. On the winding back roads, scattering from Jerome Cutoff, Arizona, every echo and empty home hides more than the usual dust and silence, and sometimes what waits among the ruins wishes you'd never found your way in. My name is Billy, and I'm the kind of person who craves forgotten places, a shape out of time, happier with cracked sidewalks and abandoned rooms than crowded city nights. Jerome's ghost town always sang out to me, hidden between haunted switchbacks and the wild sweep of old mining roads, its empty buildings and rusted minecarts familiar in ways I couldn't explain. I'd chased urban legends before, haunted bridges, cold spots and empty churches, even the great mines that left half the hillsides to collapse, but Jerome's core sidesteps simple explanation. It was autumn when I followed the cutoff, chasing stories of ghosts in white and silent screams lost to the canyons. The road twists, hugging ravines and switchbacks, each curve promising something out of reach. Tourists come for the kitsch, the gift shops, the fake haunted houses. But some locals keep their stories to themselves, describing old heartbreaks and losses that never left the land. That's the kind of haunting that drew me. I spent hours wandering through the old streets, tracing my fingers over crumbling stone and shattered glass, letting the air fill with the scent of cold iron and juniper. Dusk crept up slowly, bathing the town in gold and then blue, until all that was left of civilization was the faint hum of my own thoughts and the soft tap of boots against rock. On my way home, the highway felt sharper, as if every sound, coyote cry, wind, the tired whine of my engine, had taken on new weight. That's when I saw her. A woman dressed all in white, standing alone at the exit, her silhouette impossibly tall and steady. It wasn't just the dress, or even the sorrow in her posture. It was the sense of profound longing radiating from her like heat from old stones. I slowed down, unsure. This was not a hitchhiker, no sign of danger. Only a woman staring down the road, eyes locked on the mining ravine as if willing someone back into the world. Time seemed to stretch. I felt her gaze land on me and my breath caught, the usual confidence melting away. She raised one hand pointing toward an old wooden fence, and the memory of every lost love and tragedy in the town pressed against my chest. The miners lost in the collapse, women left, waiting on platforms in fading sunlight. I didn't stop, but I couldn't make myself speed up either. As I drifted past, she turned, eyes following even as the rest of her didn't move. My mirror showed only a wisp of white, framed against the shadowed hills. The air grew frigid, every sense sharpening, memories flickering through my mind. Times I'd wandered alone, searching for something unnamed, only to find more emptiness. Later, long after I left the Cutoff, I pulled over, shaken. I searched history and folklore online. Jerome was full of ghost stories, most about lost miners or vengeful spirits, but the woman in white was always different. She was never seen up close, never spoken to, but travelers swore she waited for someone who had crossed over long ago. Some said she kept dangerous wanderers from vanishing into the mines. Others said she summoned those doomed to repeat their tragedies until their heartbreak echoed forever. That night, my dreams were haunted by empty streets and moonlit cliffs, footsteps chasing me down endless stairs. I could hear her calling without words, like grief itself, unbroken, echoing between ruined homes. Even when I woke, my skin was cold, and the wind seemed to carry distant voices through the cracked window. I've visited Jerome since, but always in daylight, never alone. Sometimes I pass tourists at the old mining station who claim to have heard humming late at night, or report a tall lady at the cliff's edge. Nobody ever really meets her. Nobody ever confirms more than a wisp or a chill. But if you walk those broken roads after dusk and think the loneliness is getting to you, remember, some ghosts wait, not for vengeance or fear, but simply because love, loss, lasts longer than stone. My name is Billy, and I once locked eyes with the woman in white at Jerome Cutoff. If you find yourself answering the call of haunted mining roads, listen carefully. The sorrow you feel isn't always your own, but if you're not careful, it will become yours until you return to the town, hoping for peace that may never be granted. Some echoes, once heard, never fade. Blue and red lights swirling in your rearview mirror can mean two things in the Arizona night. Either you're about to be pulled over, or you've just glimpsed something that isn't part of any police department. On Devil's Highway, some signals are only meant for the desperate or the damned. My name is Drew, and all my life, I've been careful about speed limits, back roads, and anything that gives even the faintest whiff of trouble on high desert highways. Old-timers say Apache County keeps more secrets than most places, and Route 6666, they call it Route 491 now, but we all remember the old number, has a reputation for pulling the worst out of anyone who travels alone past midnight. On this stretch of road, authority doesn't always wear a badge. It was late fall, the hours after midnight, when the blackness outside seems thicker, emptier, and more permanent. I was driving east back toward Shiprock, ready for nothing more than strong coffee and warm bed. The air was dry, the last hint of summer gone, and my only company was the steady thrum of tires and the odd static from my battered radio. I'd just passed the 60-mile marker, nothing on the road in either direction, when blue lights erupted behind me, spinning above a car that had appeared out of nowhere. Heart hammering, I checked my speed. Barely 10 above, nothing to worry about, but instinct still screamed caution. The car's headlights burned too bright, drowning out my mirrors, so I slowed down and took the next pull-off without a fight. The cruiser rolled up, its lights washing the road in reds and blues, and even from the cab I could tell something was wrong. No number on the roof, no emblem on the door, just blank black paint and glare. I rolled down the window, waiting on edge, prepared for the usual nerves. The officer never got out. The blue lights clicked off, leaving only the chill of the desert night. Then an authoritative voice, cold and strange, drifted through the air. "Slow down. Last warning." The words hit me harder than the ticket. Something in their delivery, flat, mechanical, without even a hint of irritation, felt less like a reprimand, more like a final farewell. My hands shook as I nodded, mumbling an apology, and the cruiser surged forward, headlights blinding as it passed me and vanished into the dark. No tire noise, no engine note, just instant silence, and no tracks either, when I checked the roadside with a flashlight trembling in my grip. I kept moving, slower now, adrenaline leaking into something more primitive, pure terror. For the next half hour, the road was empty again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of cold eyes on the back of my head. Twice, my radio fizzed with static, and then with old country music I hadn't heard since childhood, a tune my father used to sing when he warned me about the night police. I tried not to think about it. Later, outside a broken-down motel near the Colorado border, an old rancher was sweeping dust from the front walk. We chatted. By then, I was searching for anything ordinary to anchor myself. When I mentioned the Phantom Cruiser, he only smiled, eyes narrowed, and said, "Count your blessings. Not everyone who gets pulled over goes home." He spun a tale about drivers forced to stop by unmarked cars, only to never be seen again. Sometimes, he claimed, they would find abandoned rigs on the shoulder, doors left open, keys still swinging in the ignition. I dismissed it as folklore until the next night, when blue lights flashed from the knots in the ravine ahead. Every nerve screamed at me to keep moving, but the car, if it was real, never reappeared. The air grew icier, and my thoughts drowned in the certainty that this stretch of highway was being watched by something, not someone, that needed to keep its count in balance. Now, I drive Devil's Highway rarely, and never alone. I've heard other stories since. Truckers radioing warnings about phantom stops, folks who swear by prayers, and lucky coins before crossing the county line. Sometimes, when the moon is bright and the wind dead, I wonder if the figure behind the wheel is even human, or just the echo of all the fear wrecked over decades of disasters and loss. If you ever see blue lights on an empty road and your only companion is the hum of your tires, double-check for a badge, a name, or anything that makes sense. And if you hear an emotionless voice giving you your last warning, slow down and leave the desert behind you, before something else claims the rest of your night. My name is Drew, and on the Devil's Highway, authority itself might be the last ghost you ever meet. There are roads you travel so often that every tree, every turn, every patch of wind seems familiar. And then one night, the ordinary answers back with something you wish you'd never met. If the shadow in your headlights never blinks, and the forest seems to hush as your tires pass, ask yourself, how well do you really know what walks beside you? My name is Dylan, and there are pieces of Highway 89A near Prescott National Forest that look like every other mountain pass. But anyone who travels alone out there after dark, when the mist drifts down and every sound seems to echo in the empty spaces, knows there's a dividing line between peace and something deeply wrong. That night began like any other, a shortcut home after a routine delivery. The dashboard glowed gentle orange, FM radio skipping in and out, my hands steady on the wheel. At Crestview, the pavement curls into heavy woods, black as pitch. I've stopped there before, sometimes for a coffee, sometimes just for the hush that wraps around the pines still asleep. This time the fog was waiting. It rolled in with no warning, climbing the ravine in slow, solid waves. I felt every nerve sharpen, not from cold, but from some ancient warning humming below conscious thought. My high beams cut through the fog in short, pale stripes. The trees swelled and shrank along the edges, alive but silent. I pressed on, thinking only of mileage and hours until dawn. Then I saw him. He walked the highway divide, straight down the median, head bent. Tall, spare, bundled in an old brown jacket, moving as if timing his steps with my own silent wishes. My heart skittered. Plenty of transients roam this route, but he moved differently. No hitch, no limp, feet never changing speed. He never glanced toward the car. He just walked. I slowed down, unsure if I should pass or keep my distance, caught in the strange certainty that breaking the pace might invite something I couldn't take back. minutes, or miles. It's hard to say, piled up like autumn leaves as the mist thickened. Each time I slowed, each time I watched the silent figure, the world seemed to bend. Familiar outcrops blurred, familiar roadside markers retreated into smoke. A sense of unease grew heavy. The air pressed at my skin like water. At every curve, my beams picked up the outline walking the divide, the reflection shrinking and swelling, never once changing his stride. At one turn, I thought I saw his face caught in a glimmer of roadside glass, angular, hollow-eyed, and set in a way that made my gut knot. Fear, but also something else. Memory blooming in my mind. Flashes of other travelers, stories half heard, but doubted. Sudden jolts awake at odd hours. Dreams of men walking through endless woods. I reached for the radio, desperate for noise, but static and muffled voices answered back, mixing old children's songs with urgent whispers. I rounded a broad curve, headlights flickering in the fog, and saw him stop, dead center in the median. He turned then, finally, as if looking not at my rig, but through the glass, at a world I couldn't see. The silence deepened. For an instant, I felt the pull, to stop, to offer help, to ask the stranger why this night of all nights he chose to walk the border of sanity and dream. But I didn't stop. Survival isn't always about courage. Sometimes it's about accepting. There are boundaries you do not cross, warnings you obey before reason can catch up. I pressed the gas, kept my eyes forward, and the headlights picked out nothing but bare road and dancing fog. When I checked my mirror, the man was gone. I drove for hours, brain-fogged, wrists aching from constant turns. The forest thinned, the terrain smoothed into familiar lines of orange desert, but something stayed behind. A feeling, dense as smog, that my own past was tugged a little closer to the stranger's. Every radio report that fizzed through my cab, a missing hiker, lost dog, unexplained footprints seen near the old campground, seemed to hum with new meaning. I watched for movement in the mirrors long past dawn, unsure whose memory or shadow I'd picked up. Days later, I stopped at the Crestview Diner. The waitress knew the look on my face. She'd seen it before. She asked softly if I'd run into the walker on the divide. I hesitated, then nodded. She poured a coffee, told me about the legends. A man searching for something lost decades ago never speaks, never stops, always alone. Some say he's looking for his family. Others say he's a warning. If you see him standing still, best keep driving. People who stop don't always make it out of the fog. I drove that stretch for months afterward, never alone. Sometimes, on cold nights, I saw distant figures shimmer at the edge of the trees, always moving along the medians, never quite approaching. Sometimes a trucker would radio in with a story. Always a man alone in the shoulder, always silent. If you ever take Highway 89A as the witching hour falls, watch for the walker. Not because you need to help, but because some mysteries are safe or unsolved, and not every shadow deserves your attention. My name is Dylan, and I learned the hard way that some men walk the divide between what's real and what's lost, and that if you're lucky, the only thing you take from that midnight journey is a warning. Drive on. Let the fog swallow the secrets, and never wait to see who might be walking behind you. What would you do if the horizon itself came to life, chasing you with orbs, shadows, and things that burn brighter than headlights before vanishing into the empty black? On the open highway near Kingman, Arizona, some mysteries aren't hidden. They want to be seen, and once you've seen them, they never let you go. My name is Ellis, and my whole life I've found solace in late-night driving. The hum of tires and the constant line of the center stripe were my meditation. A promise that as long as you follow the road, you'll find your way home. But one autumn night west of Kingman, as I crested the lonely rise just before the lights of the city, I learned that not all lights are created to guide you. Some want you lost, It hadn't been a strange evening at first. The air was heavy with the scent of creosote and rain, every mile marker a comfort in the emptiness. A storm had just passed, so the ground still shimmered with leftover heat. I counted every minute, every pulse of music skipping from my radio, and measured my breathing by the distance between roadside reflectors. Then I saw the first light, blue, round, dancing in midair 2 feet above the center line, keeping speed and somehow holding perfect pace. At first, I thought it was another car. I waited for brake lights, for the beam of approaching headlights, for a truck to crest the next rise. Nothing came, only the blue sphere, at times splitting into 3, then merging and blinking in the periphery of my vision. I tried to adjust the radio, thinking static and isolation were playing tricks, but the radio shrieked, then faded into an old waltz I'd never heard before. Curiosity can be a trap. I flashed my high beams, thinking maybe a bicyclist or a ranch hand lost on the road. With all that blue, surely someone would signal back. But the lights never changed direction, never grew larger or smaller, never flickered with any source I could chase. I pressed on, nerves dulling to fear, each minute on that ribbon of blacktop growing longer. Then, as my mind drifted toward unease, the orbs darted suddenly off the road, rising to float above the desert, rippling with color like gasoline on water. I slowed, then stopped. They hovered in silence. The air lost its warmth, replaced by a hush that roared between my ears and made every inch of my skin crawl. In that breathless space, the world distorted. Shadows stretched wrong on the asphalt. My headlights wavered. With every blink, the scene shifted. The road a looping film, space compressing, as if I'd been caught in a closed box with just the glow and the dark for company. No sound but my creaking seat and watch ticked away. When I moved, the lights shadowed my motion, always out of reach, always one step ahead. At one point, they circled the car and then rose into the sky, creating a whirling pillar that danced once in place before shooting toward the mountains to the north. I watched, transfixed, feeling the familiar terrain lose, meaning until I wasn't sure what part of the road I was on, or whether home and destination mattered anymore. Time became elastic. I drove on, eyes glued to the edge of darkness just beyond the reach of the orbs. Colors flickered in quick pulses beneath the chassis. First blue, then a sickly green, then yellow that faded every childhood memory I'd ever tucked away for comfort. I wanted to stop and run, then to chase, then to do anything except linger on the line between terror and revelation. In the rear-view mirror, nothing, only infinite horizon, and now and then a single brief flash. When dawn threatened the edge of the hills, everything shifted back. The air warmed, the lights vanished, and the world snapped awake mid-song, as if I'd never left the highway at all. Through it all, my watch and phone clocks disagreed. The odometer didn't move for 20 ticks, and dust clung to the car as though I'd spent the night in a storm. I searched for explanations, science, stress, fatigue. But all I could recall was the certainty that those lights had waited for me and would again. Since that night, I've avoided that stretch of road after dark. But sometimes, curiosity claws at me. Locals wince when you mention lights over Kingman, and truckers mutter prayers before rolling through. Kids dare each other to park and wait, and a few return home changed, silent staring, trailing stories about orbs and lost time. There are even those who, legend says, followed the blue lights out into the hills and never made it back at all. If you feel the pull to chase the unexplained, weigh it carefully. Some mysteries want to be uncovered, but at a price you may never understand. My name is Ellis, and on the far end of Arizona's haunted highways, some lights are omens. Chase them, and you might never find your way home again. If stories like this keep you awake at night as much as they keep you searching for answers, you're meant to be part of the Haunted Fears horror family. Subscribe below, leave your wildest theories in the comments, and join us again soon. Because on these highways, the night is never really empty, and your next midnight drive could rewrite your reality.